Hi guys, Taylor Cocke here for Yahoo Esports, and I am here with Greg Street, the design director on League of Legends at Riot Games. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, good. Thanks for having me.
Next week is GDC, which is the Game Developers Conference for those that don't know, and you're giving a bit of a talk there on designing League of Legends for both pro play and for lower ELO players. So can you give us a little bit of a preview of what you're going to be talking about there, just because I think the general public might be a little interested in that.
Yeah. So obviously League of Legends is a very big game, and it's a competitive PvP game almost exclusively, and we make our lives harder on ourselves by using one set of rules for the entire game. In other words, we don't have like special pro rules, which, to be honest, a lot of sports do. Like basketball has different point lines depending on, what tier you're playing at. But League has the same set of rules all across the board. We do that mostly because there's a really, there's a virtuous cycle of like spectating and then playing. So people watch esports and like, oh, I'm gonna go play a game now. And so we kind of want to use the same rules. If you see a pro using a great item build, you want to be able to use that item build without your buddy saying, oh no, that item works differently for mere mortals like ourselves.
So it is a bit of a challenge. And can you kind of talk a little bit about that challenge? Because it's obviously something that comes up a lot in the community in general. It's
and it's interesting. One of the things I touch on the talk is the kind of player perception or player expectation is that we should balance for pro. Like balance the game for the high elo and let the scrubs, just live life as they may. And that's not our philosophy. We really want to try to have a competitive experience for all players. So someone who, this is their 10th game of League of Legends to someone who's played thousands of games on Leona, for example.
Hey, it's almost as if we had a little discussion beforehand. So speaking of which, as a support main and as a Leona player myself, I do have a little bit of a bone to pick because the current meta is something that has been there's been a lot of criticism surrounding it, not only in the pro scene but also in the more casual scene. But I guess let's start with the pro scene.
Sure.
Because this season, obviously, we had the introduction of the 10-ban system, which is something that ideally would cause a larger variety of picks and forcing people to go deeper into their champion pools. But as we can see from a lot of the pro play, that hasn't necessarily been the case, specifically in the bottom lane, where it's been Jhin, Varus in every single game. So what do you think caused this? Why did this happen? Is this not just a result of the 10-ban system, but also sort of some of the item builds that have been popping up surrounding everything else?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think it is an item build problem. We've been really thrilled with the response so far to 10 bans, and we have really, we have pretty good diversity in top, mid, support, jungle. It's really the ADC role where diversity is pretty low right now. And you're right, it's a lot of Jhin, it's a lot of Varus, and we think that has a lot to do with ADCs not having good item builds, particularly early on when they need to like deal with a tank. We're getting, there's still a lot of, 4 players going down to bot lane, which may be partially because of the first tower bonus, or it may just be because they know there's a lot of auto-filled supports down there and it's easy to pick on bot lane. And so the ADCs need a way to get an early power spike, and players have tried different things out to mixed success. Some of it has been kind of unhealthy for the game overall. Some of it just hasn't been super effective, and we totally realize that's a problem that we're working on. But we really think the right solution is to offer some item options, not just, hey, let's just buff ADCs across the board.
Because I mean, that's what a lot of people have tended to be asking for is, buffing some of the ADCs that perhaps are, were meta last season, or have been meta in previous seasons, or what they consider to be a more traditional AD carry. Talking about, your Tristanas.
Believe me, we miss an
Jinx.
Option to have a Tristana or a Jinx out there.
And so it's been drawing a lot of criticism, especially from the kind of guys that I play with, because I obviously I play the game, but as a support main, I hear my AD carry buddies just basically saying like I don't feel like I have any impact on the game. And so what is your response to them saying, like, because a lot of them are saying, oh, these patches are coming too slowly. We don't see these changes actually affecting our play. How do you respond to them? How do you say, like, hey, don't worry about it, we're going to get there?
So, I mean, ADC has always kind of been a role that's a late bloomer. And we kind of make the joke that when we see a video go up on Reddit, we know that if it's from 40 minutes into the game, it's going to show the ADC getting a pentakill. And if it's from 20 minutes of the game, it's going to show the jungler just trashing the ADC over and over again. So they've always kind of had that late game power spike. Just where we are right now, they don't have a good option for early on. So when ADC players say, hey, I don't feel like I have agency, or I don't feel like I'm impacting the game, what we think is really going on is they don't feel like they have an option early on for when they're kind of getting crowded out, or when everyone, like I said, you're getting the top lane teleporting down to attack them and things like that. If the game goes pretty long and they're starting to get their 5th or 6th item, they do great. They do a ton of damage. Auto attacks are fine. It's just you have to survive until that late game. And so people are picking a lot of the more utility-oriented ADCs in order to get to that point.
But kind of the problem for a lot of the AD carries has been the fact that so many of these other champions hit their power spike so much further.
Right, or at least they have options to hit early.
Exactly, and you see this a lot in the support role, even with stuff like Zyra, stuff like Karma, even being able to essentially 1v1 an AD carry in the early stages of the game. 15 minutes in after they get a single item.
Yeah,
and that's an issue to me. Like that seems like a problem in the fact that because you. This is going to be echoing a Reddit comment that I saw earlier today, but the issue to me is that there's too much gold throughout the game, and you're seeing supports picking up an early Rylai's, you're seeing supports picking up an early Leandri's Torment, and that sort of thing, and it feels to a lot of these AD carries like. I know you've heard all this before, but it definitely is a situation where. I don't know. Even as a guy who likes to play tank supports, it feels like the power spikes are coming so much earlier for everybody else that it just feels like you're worthless. So the question becomes, how do you fix that if you want to keep the sort of the support power levels at a level that isn't back in Season 3 where we only buy brown boots.
Right, because honestly, when you look at the ability to influence the game, support is still really low. And we want to be, we're having a challenge now where not enough players even want to play support, which leads to things like autofill in solo queue. And so we want to be really careful not to hit support too hard. That would do bad things to the game overall. And we do want to fix the ADC problem, but we want to be careful. If we just buff ADC across the board, or we give them some really cheap early items, they're just going to hit a power spike early and stay there. And then it's just going to be a game about which team has the best ADC player, and they're going to win every game, which I know some ADC players are like, yeah, that's the way it should be. I'm the quarterback. I should carry the entire game. But we want to make sure that you do have to make a choice. And if you're going to have a power spike early, that should come at the cost of late game. Not that you're going to lose late game automatically, but if you're going to choose to peak early, that should come at your late game you're not going to hit it as quickly, or it's not going to be as strong when you do. Otherwise, Jhin can just be really powerful early, and there's no room for a Tristana or another traditional hyper carry later in the game.
But the balance becomes, how do you figure out where to have AD carries that feel like they're even remotely useful in the early game?
Yeah.
And then, if they're too weak, they just get totally snowballed and they become useless throughout the rest of the game, and the game ends too early for them to ever become powerful.
Yeah.
How do you find that balance? How do you figure that out?
I mean, we look at a lot of things. We look at one of the most useful stats to look at right now is the ability for a particular role to influence the game. In other words, what is your chance of affecting the outcome of the game based on the different positions you're in? And we know traditionally, mid is always very high. ADC is often very high. Jungle varies a little bit. I think we spiked it early on this season, and it got a little out of control when they could hit higher experience levels faster than the rest of the game. So we're looking at that. We're trying to figure out how do we make sure that, as I said, that ADC has an option to go strong early if they need to deal with a tank that's constantly in their lane, or a tanky support on the other side, without just having their entire power curve be, I get strong early on and I stay strong for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally there's been champions like Corki used to be this way, sort of this early spiking AD carry, or at least mid-game spiking AD carry. Ezreal used to be, before he sort of became a little bit more of a late-game carry. But those guys have sort of been pushed out of the meta. And do you think that's a result of the way that the support meta has shifted over to these mage supports like Zyra or Malzahar?
I mean, I think that's certainly a factor, that going for these heavy damage supports. And Malzahar, I think, got a little out of control with just let's fill the lane full of voidlings. What do you think about that? We like seeing Brand and Vel'Koz and Zyra down there, but they shouldn't be the only pick. And again, we don't want to respond by just nerfing everything that isn't a traditional support like like a Janna or a Braum, because we want to get more support players in the game. We want to make sure those support players are having more fun. Interestingly, I don't want to, there's a little arm wavy at this point because the data is super new, but it looks like a lot of the support players that are picking those non-traditional, usually mages or something, are autofilled players, which could be because that's all they have unlocked, or it could be that that's just the champions they like to play, or it could be they don't enjoy support, so they're going to have the most fun by just being a damage dealer. So that is something we're looking at.
I mean, okay, well, let's move on to the top lane, because top lane is another hot point currently in sort of the conversation surrounding the meta. It's another one of those spots where, not all the time, but it's not as strict as AD carry, but there's traditionally in the pro meta, there's 3 champions that are played. You got Nautilus, you got your Maokai, and you got your Poppy. And those guys are a huge sticking point, not only for the top lane, but also for AD carries and damage dealers in general, because they get so tanky so early. And a lot of people are pointing to the fact that armor is so strong as being an issue, and are calling for armor nerfs. How do you respond to sort of people that are looking for these armor nerfs?
But again, if the issue is that an ADC can't kill a tank early on, we think that's really like an ADC itemization problem. They need something, if they're picking the Titanic Hydras and stuff like that to be able to do a lot of splash damage, and they're not even having the effect they want of being able to like melt down the tank, then I think it's mostly an itemization problem. We need to make, there were certainly times early on in the season and after the preseason update where like Poppy plus Courage the Colossus was kind of out of control. We are, I think we've talked about our next big roster update is to look at some of those tanks, including champions like Maokai, to try to figure out like what can they do. Their entire kit just can't be I never die. That's not fun for everyone else. But at the same time, if you just nerf their survivability, they're just kind of like weak juggernauts, and we're scared they'll slide out that way too.
And one of the ways that traditionally we've been able to deal with these enormous tanks is armor penetration, obviously, and that was changed to lethality earlier this season. And it turns out lethality is a little too strong, specifically against squishies, and has been nerfed a few times now. But it doesn't seem to have been mitigating the problem of tanks so far, which was sort of what it was designed to do in the first place, as far as I can tell. What happened there? What happened is this just a numbers issue? Is this a algorithm issue? What happened with lethality in regards to tanks?
I mean, there's definitely a math issue at play. When you do things that bypass armor, they end up being the most effective against things with low armor rather than things with high armor, as you'd expect. At the same time, we don't want to create a situation where the tank is trying to stack on armor and the other champions just pick up something that negates that armor and is, ironically stronger the more armor they stack. There needs to be a little more give and take there. That's kind of why we like the idea of if you opt into a armor melting build, that needs to come at the expense of something else. Like maybe your overall AD is not as high as it would be, or your crits are smaller, something like that. In order, and I'm not blaming the players, but in order to solve the problem, they've done things like, we're going to only go for lethality when it's really, really good, and then that just kind of becomes the one path to build, which isn't really the ideal either.
And patch 7.4 was an interesting one to me, especially in this regard, because there was if you look at the opening intro, it's talking about how y'all are working towards buffing AD carries and making sure that they feel more powerful. But if you look through the notes, there's 3 items that got changed. You got to change Ghostblade, you got to change Last Whisper, and it's whatever the Giant's Executioner, is that what that item's called? Whatever that item's called, what it builds it to. And you change Black Cleaver. And as far as anyone can tell, for Black Cleaver and Ghostblade, these are nerfs for the AD carries that build them. Last Whisper is sort of more of a situational tank busting item that doesn't have as much AD. So so a lot of people are saying this isn't actually a buff for AD carries, and it's hard to see how this is going to fix the problem of tank busting. What was the intention here with making those? Is this something that you guys actually think is going to really work and help out, or is this a problem of this is still the same cycle where we're figuring out the AD carry power problem?
Yeah, as I said, I think the real solution to the AD carry problem is going to be dramatically changing an early item or adding a new item. And those are, I don't want to use the word expensive, always sounds like we're talking about money, but it's a resource-intensive thing in that it's easy to get wrong and screw up the game. So we have to be really careful that we're doing the right thing. It's a hard thing to kind of squeeze in between like patch 7.3 and 7.4 when you often have only a couple of days to make meaningful changes. And the issue with items is always a chicken and egg thing of like, are the champions too powerful because the items are too good, or are the items just a crutch that are propping, that are the only reason a certain build or certain position is working is because of the items. So we're trying to take a holistic look at what are the early item options for an ADC, and they're really challenging position to balance because unless you're talking about a Corki, the damage is so tied up in the auto attacks, right? And there's just only so much you can do to modify an auto attack. You can make it hit harder, you can make it ignore armor, you can make it crit bigger, and they're very, it's a very linear curve as your attack damage just gets higher and higher, as opposed to buffing a mage's abilities, which are on a longer cooldown, or probably skill shots and more situational.
So let's move on to yet another position.
Cool.
Why don't we talk about the jungle? Because the jungle is, to me, probably the most interesting role in the game right now. It is arguably the most powerful role in the game, depending on who you're talking to. What do you guys think about the state of the jungle right now? It seems like there's a decent balance between a lot of assassins, but also a couple bruisers here and there. Almost no tanks, but. Where do you guys see the state of the jungle meta?
And some of those assassins are just, I think they're only there because they're overtuned, or we're still kind of trying to get them under control a little bit. I felt at the end of last season the jungle was a little too dominant, and particularly early game, it often does come down to what lane does the jungler want to gank, and how good is the jungler at ganking, and that really is going to affect the entire rest of the game. It also felt, again, anecdotally to me, that in pro, jungler was really dominant throughout the game, and they, a jungler that was built super tanky, like a Skarn or something, just never died late game. Like, what am I supposed to do to deal with this? It seems like, and again, early this season was just with the changes made to the jungle camps, it was too easy for a jungler to get an experience and gold jump on other roles and just totally stomp them, which wasn't ideal. We've made some changes to the camps to try to fix that a little bit. I feel like now it's in a little better place. We're starting to see the diversity come up, again, almost certainly because there's a 10-ban effect going on in there. And we have, trying to think how public this is, we have some changes to Rek'Sai, who's kind of been a dominant pick for a long time.
We've seen a little bit of it. Apparently, the ultimate is changing.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I was talking about.
So we're not entirely sure what that is going to be exactly.
Okay, yeah.
But
we've actually run it by a few pros and other players, and seems pretty positive change overall.
Rek'Sai is a great champion to talk about because she's been a sort of top tier pick forever. Since her release, basically. But you're seeing her starting to get pushed out by some of these more counter jungling champions. You see your Kha'Zix, your Lee Sins, even an Evelynn here and there. For what I've seen traditionally, it seems that Rek'Sai has sort of been the Renekton of the jungle. Sort of that bar. If you're better than Rek'Sai, you're overtuned. If you're worse than Rek'Sai, you're maybe a little underpowered. Do you still see Rek'Sai as sort of that bar, or have you guys been shifting the bar around to sort of figure out a better champion standard?
Yeah, I feel like Rek'Sai has been too good throughout a lot of last season particularly. She can get anywhere on the map. She can get really, really tanky and hard to kill. Lee Sin is a more unusual case because it's a super high skill champion that players love to. Can be really frustrated when they're playing against a good Lee Sin with hundreds of games because Lee Sin can get all over the map really well. I don't think Lee Sin is going anywhere.
He never has.
Yeah. Kha'Zix, I think, is more of a tuning issue with assassins. We're looking at, I can't remember when exactly those changes are, but LeBlanc, Rengar, and Kha'Zix probably a little came out of the assassin update still a little overtuned.
And that's a classic problem with reworks and changes in League of Legends as a whole. You see your Poppies, your LeBlancs, all these sort of remakes tend to come out perhaps a little overtuned. What happens with that? Like, how does that happen seemingly every single time? How do you figure out a way to make sure that they're more balanced when they come out?
It is a challenge. We know that if a champion comes out undertuned, players may never give them a chance. We had this problem with Bard initially. Bard's Bard's fairly popular now, but at the time, his win rate was a little low, and players are like, well, I'm not even going to bother, investing in this champion. So I'm not saying that we over-tune champions on purpose, but we're really, really careful that they don't come out under-tuned. We have an internal play balance team that is all super high elo, some ex-pro players, and they really try to put all these champion changes through their paces. And those guys, to their credit, can often be a little conservative of like, hey, we think pros are gonna be able to counter this too early. Let's be careful here. So we're trying to find, and even though they can play dozens of games, that's no substitute for the literal millions of games that are going to get played once changes go live and players try, hey, what about this item build? What about leveling W before E and things like that? So that comes out. We made a lot of changes at Assassins at the same time, messing with lethality, messing with some masteries, messing with items. And we do that knowing it is going to hurt balance. And that's the entire reason we make massive changes like that in preseason. I think we made a couple of mistakes this time, like, we didn't message it strongly enough to players of like, hey, we are going to hurt balance. We know this. It's not that our live team is terrible. It's that we're making a lot of changes to the game, and we're just not going to be able to catch up that quickly. And oh, by the way, that's why we try to do it at preseason when we have less of an impact. Unfortunately, we coupled that this year with things like ranked turning on earlier. And also our MMR was a little out of whack at first because we had two competitive queues with dynamic queue and solo queue coming on at the same time. So I think strategically that was probably a mistake to have all three of those things, meaning the massive gameplay changes, queue changes, and rank starting early all at the same time, because then it's harder to tell players, hey, we know balance is going to take a hit while you're really, focusing on your, where you're going to come in at the different tiers and getting back into ranked. So not sure we'll do that again. We're still talking about that. And we definitely want to set expectations of the players. When we're going to make roster updates, things are going to be out of whack a little bit. We patch every 2 weeks, so we'll try to get it adjusted as fast as possible.
So that sort of goes back to your original, what you're talking about at GDC, is trying to figure out how to make sure that all the players are happy. I mean, obviously you're never going to make everybody happy. Sure. This is League of Legends after all. But how do you make sure that, you got these super high ELO players testing out all these changes, but is there a way to ensure that the lower ELO players are going to be happy with it? I mean, what is your internal sort of strategy for figuring out how it's going to affect the lower and mid ELO players? Sure.
Well, we know there are factors, there are features you can put into a champion that will make them more attractive to high elo players and more attractive to low elo players. For example, any champion with a lot of what we call AI-dependent power, meaning they're Heimerdinger and they make turrets, or they have a pet like Tibbers. AI-dependent power doesn't scale with skill nearly as well as the rest of the game does, so we know that those champions have a hard time breaking into the upper tiers.
Unless they're Ivern.
And Ivern's an interesting exception that we have Daisy, and I think it's despite Daisy, not because of Daisy, but we know if we overtune the AI, they're just going to stomp lower level.
Sure.
So that's one consideration. Another one is any, channeled ults. High elo are going to counter them immediately. Low elo will probably never counter them. So if as a developer you're trying to balance, this ult is really, really powerful, but it can be interrupted, that probably means you're just not creating a champion that's going to see a lot of high-tier play. And that's okay. Not every champion has to be for high-tier play, because we would probably end up with a really homogenous champion set. Everyone would look like Elise, who is like really, really sharp strengths and really, really sharp weaknesses, and not enough of a generalist to ever be super effective in silver. Kog'Maw always has trouble being played at low elos because you have to keep your Cog alive, and solo queue is not great at that coordination at the lower tiers.
So there's one lane that we haven't really talked about yet. Let's talk about mid.
Sure.
Where do you guys sort of see the state of mid right now? Because it is a lot of assassins, but there's also Corki, who, with his damage right now, might as well be an assassin. But where do you guys see that state right now? It does seem that it is the most diverse lane.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, we're thrilled at the diversity of mid, but it's almost always been the most diverse lane. There's just a lot of champions that function there just by the kind of design of mages and assassins. They have a lot of their power tied up in their abilities, and you can do a lot with abilities. There's a lot of, they tend, not assassins necessarily, but the mages are all ranged, so you can have a lot of skill shots. You can have a lot of situational abilities and, easy ways for players to prove their skill or not. So it's always been a relatively healthy lane. There's certainly, right now, mid can carry a game just as well as they ever can. And I think one of the weird things about it is I think players kind of know what they want in mid lane, and it kind of delivers on that expectation, as opposed to, say, top lane, where you have some top laners who say, the reason I like top is it's an island, and I'm playing a mini game. I'm basically playing Street Fighter against another top laner for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll join the rest of the game. Right. And then other top laners like, no, what I like is being able to teleport and help out, or, you know, we introduced Rift Herald a couple seasons ago as a top lane objective. It's, you know, to be fair, it's pretty much dead in the game right now, so top laners don't have that to interact with. And we already talked about kind of the state of bottom where, yes, ADCs need some help, but we also have to be careful because sometimes there's this player perception of, hey, I'm an ADC, it should be up to me whether or not I win lane, and oh, by the way, if I win lane, I should win the whole game because I'm the carry. And that's, you know, we don't want the game to be one awesome player and 4 supports kind of helping them be awesome.
Well, why not?
Because 20% of players would be super happy and everyone else would be a little frustrated.
I suppose it's better than 20% of players being super unhappy with being super weak early, like AD carries right now.
Yeah.
What I'm implying.
Yeah. And we need to fix it for
sure. And sort of finally here.
Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up here, and again, thank you for coming here and talking to us. Really appreciate it. But player perception is a huge issue.
Yeah.
And especially with power. And a lot of the pro players are awfully vocal about what they consider to be strong and what they consider to be overpowered or underpowered, for that matter. How do you deal with things that you guys think that are super strong? Like, are there some champions, sort of side question here, are there some champions that internally are considered crazy strong, but pros don't consider them strong?
Yeah.
And they're balancing sort of the perception levels of lower elo players. How do you guys deal with those perception levels?
It's a huge challenge for starters because we don't, as a general rule, just make our internal data public. And it's a really interesting discussion, and maybe we should. Maybe we would save ourselves a lot of headache
if we
just publicize that. The challenge is there's also a risk if we're not careful about it that we kind of create a self-fulfilling prophecy. That players see, oh, this champion's win rate's low, so I'm not going to play them, and then they just drop off the face of the earth. We also know pros could really impact the game for everyone else. If people see someone playing Misfortune support, all of a sudden there's a spike in Misfortune support because normal players are like, oh, there must be something special here. And if pros are picking it, that means it'll be effective for me as well.
That was a great day as a Blitzcrank player.
Yeah. And we know that's not, we know that players can often make what appear to be smart but actually ineffective choices by just mimicking what the pros do. I mean, we take pro feedback super seriously. I mean, those guys play the game a lot. They understand a lot of the nuance about it. On the other hand, they are, they're the celebrities for League of Legends, and they have a brand, and they have, they want viewers for their streams and stuff like that. So they want to have strong opinions, and we don't want to be in the business of always just trying to undermine them or shut them down when they're, when they're saying something.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for coming again.
I
really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation. We would love to do this more often.
We
depending
should,
on, when you guys blow up the meta and ruin everything, as always.
Mid-season, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Yeah.
But for everyone else, thank you so much for watching. I'm Taylor Cocke for Yahoo Esports.